Hello and welcome to The Hindu editorial discussion. My name is Ryan Pinto and I am going to discuss with you The Hindu editorial of November 2020. What are the topics that first we are going to discuss? Today we are going to discuss on four editorials. The first one being on the role of the media and the Supreme Court. Second one is going to be a general editorial where you will understand whatever is happening across the world. It's going to be a very important editorial. The next two editorials are going to be based on economics. One of them being on the RBI. That's recently we have a bank which was not allowed to work by the RBI. There was a moratorium we are going to discuss. And the final one is going to be on economic liberalism. So just remember four editorials. Let's start with the first editorial. The first one on media and you can say Supreme Court. This is mostly part of GS paper 2 and ethics. These points can be used in your essay. So when we talk about the first editorial, if you see, there is a lot of debate on freedom of speech and expression going on today. But does freedom of speech and expression means you can use, you can say, you can show whatever you want? The answer is no. So the editorial mostly talks on that. Curbing on air bigotry. The distinction between free speech. So there is a hot debate which is going on. Free speech and hate speech. Does free speech include hate speech? Should be at the heart of the regulation. The Supreme Court's poser to the Union government on the measures it can and is willing to take against communally slanted television coverage should not end in undesirable consequences. Supreme Court has asked the central government, what are you doing to stop these hate speeches, to stop the various channels which are creating communal divide? What is the central government doing? That is the question which is asked by Supreme Court. And Supreme Court in this editorial we'll see is also asking the center to to bring out regulations. But this does not mean it will hurt the fundamentals right of freedom of speech. So that's the debate we are going to discuss. The court's warning that if government fails to explain its mechanism to deal with the problem, it would create its own, may take the debate down a slippery slope. Now, one issue is fundamental right of freedom of speech and hate speech. Second is the fight between the judiciary and the executive. Not a fight, you can say both are trying to come in each other's domain. So that's how confrontation you can say. Okay, so that's how this editorial needs to be seen and the points to be understood. The court is hearing petitions against the communal color given by some channels to incidences of large clusters of COVID-19 infections. So what had happened is when COVID-19 had started, there was a group of people in Delhi. You can also remember the Tablighi Jamaat, which was there in Delhi. It is a congregation of missionaries of the Islamic community. And they were present over there. Due to some reasons, they were there, and the media took up the matter, and the media started without any proof giving allegations that they are the people who are actually spreading the virus, etc., etc. This was heavily countered by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court asked what was the facts, what was the proof for all these things, and the central government did not take any actions against all this which was happening against a community. The portrait of the participants as intentional super spreaders was vicious and motivated. The center seems reluctant to intervene while the court seems to be batting for greater media regulation. It was earlier always the governments used to be pro-regulation. But now, since most of the part of the media is with the government, now the government seems to be reluctant on regulation, whereas the court is now saying the media should be regulated. The center's affidavit stated, what did the center reply? Media coverage predominantly struck a balance between or a neutral perspective, and that it was open to the viewer's choice from a number of varying perspectives given by different media channels. It is very interesting. The center is saying it is the viewer's choice. If they don't like it, they they need not watch it. But can we leave all these to the viewer's choice? A lot of wrong things will happen, and then it will be the choice of the people. That's not how it works. The court is keen to know what action has been taken under the, remember this act, Cable Television Networks Regulation Act, against offending broadcasters. So instead of having more regulation and acts, there is already a Cable Television Network Regulation Act. The court appears unconvinced that the present mechanism of self regulation, the new National Broadcasting Standards Authority, is effective. So, when we talk about media regulation, first remember there are acts present. Secondly, there is this National Broadcasting Standards Authority, which includes many media houses. So, it's for self regulation. But there is no work going on there, nothing is happening. The government is in any case empowered under the act prohibit transmission of programs that violate the program or advertising codes, section 19, and even an entire channel in public interest, section 20. So these acts actually have given a lot of power to the government, but what the governments are doing is not known. There is no doubt that egregious violations of norms are not uncommon, depending on the damage done to individuals or institutions, or even society at large. There is enough scope for action under the penal law. So, first we saw a fight between, or you can say a debate between freedom of speech and hate speech. Next is the areas where the executive can take over, or the areas where the the Supreme Court can take over. Then we spoke about the two acts or two ways where media can be regulated. First is the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act and the National Broadcasting Standards Authority. However, there is a class of violation of norms in broadcasting that stands apart. The case of Sudarshan News. So first is the Tablighi Jamaat case. Second is the Sudarshan News case recently, which began a series that propagated hate against Muslims is a fragrant example. So Sudarshan News had brought this TV channel, or you can say a series, where it was talking about UPSC jihad, and it is so wrong, where students have passed with merit to frame them as people doing it for religion. The government has merely administered a caution to the channel and asked it to moderate the content of future episodes and avoid breaching the program code. What did the government do? Just gave a caution. The court distinguished between free speech and hate speech. The distinction should be at the heart of any order, creating a new mechanism, if at all one is needed, to deal with broadcast media excesses. So court just gave the distinction between free speech and hate speech. What the court said is, bring out something where the media can be regulated, or else we will bring it. So this was the first article. Second article talks about the global issues, what is happening across the world. Some of the things which are happening internationally can help in GS paper 3, international relation. So let's see what is happening across the world. A world in chaos and moment of truth. Informational autocracy is the latest danger that threatens democracies. So just remember, in your answers, essays, and various topics, you can use this. Today is now, whoever, like the other day, we were discussing about technology and importance of data. Data is currency now. Informational autocracy is the latest danger that threatens democracies. Whoever holds information, they are the rulers. Change is the essence of time. Let's see what are the changes and what are the situations which is happening. America's divides. First, we'll focus on America. Recently, you must have heard about the elections and a lot of fight between Donald Trump's supporters and Joe Biden's supporters, both claiming victory, both not especially Donald Trump, not believing or trusting the Election Commission of America, the presumption that existence of acutely sharp divisions between liberals and conservatives and competition between ideologues and hardcore practitioners alone are endangering democracies in today's world. This is happening everywhere, not only in America. There is a fight between conservatives and liberals. It's not only America. America preaches to the world on the principles of democracy, but in itself, there is a danger on democratic principles with the recent after the recent elections. Other reasons are efforts by US President Donald Trump to negate the verdict of the recently held presidential elections, partake of a new set of tactics previously seen only in dictatorship. The tactics which are seen in America were actually seen only in case where there were dictators present, like attacking the elections, saying that the elections are fraud, not believing in the democratic principles, not believing in the procedures. It is only possible in areas or cases where in history we have seen the dictators doing it. The lack of shamefacedness on the part of the United States authorities, even as they engage in this, while lecturing the whole world about the virtues of democracy, represent a new pole of in the utilization of fake news. The specter that confronts democracy today is grave. In the case of US, one of the world's oldest democracies, what we are witnessing is a deep divide, one that is equally true of many other democratic nations today. What we have to understand is because of this fight between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Donald Trump attacking the democratic principles, election commission, other authorities, the democratic principles are in danger over there. It can lead to mobocracy. The mobs can take over, and this America actually earlier used to lecture the other countries across the world. Clearly, Donald Trump's support comes from a segment that has serious grievances against policies by so called liberal segments. Donald Trump's supporters do not like the liberals. As we know, Donald Trump is from the conservative and in the Republican Party. And in turn, the neglect of their interest. This is true as many other democracies as well and must be viewed as a wake up call. This can be seen in most of the democracies. What is evident is that issues of identity or threats to identity you can see everywhere, in not only in United States of America, even in India these issues are going on. Issues of identity or threats to identity are becoming an important issue in elections across democracies. Manipulation of grievances by using psychometric techniques. You must have seen Cambridge and Analytica using the data from Facebook and manipulating the data and manipulating people and manipulating grievances. So, as I started earlier, information autocracy and the use of deep fakes made possible through artificial intelligence further enhances threat to current notions of democracy. That was United States about Donald Trump, Joe Biden and democratic principles. In Europe, Europe is grappling with resurgent COVID-19 pandemics. We have the second wave and it is hitting them hard. Uncertain Brexit will further damage the prospects of UK and Europe. Russia under Vladimir Putin remains an enigma, for despite its military strength and strategic congruence with China, its future appears increasingly uncertain. So you have COVID-19, you have uncertain Brexit, Russia is under Vladimir Putin, and there is no development happening there much. France displays even greater fragility amongst the other European nations, all embracing secularism with overweening emphasis on social cohesion seems to be going out of the door. So the France's program of laicite, where all the part of the sections of this France should come together, is going out of door. More focuses on votes and politics and conservatism. This is Europe. You can see every country in Europe is facing issues. The recent waves of terrorist attacks are rising, beginning with the beheading of a French teacher, recently of a Paris school teacher by an Islamic State supporter, followed by IS violence in Nice, have been a major trigger, raising questions about long held secular beliefs. Terrorism, as I've told you, is increasing not only in Asia but also in Europe, especially France. We have seen two terror attacks happening in France and in Australia. Other issues exist as a catalyst to this emerging situation. Terrorism is resurfacing. France, Paris, and Nice, and in Austria, sorry, a reminder of transnational character of the threat. So France is not only being affected; it's not only Asian countries which are affected, but also France. Dictatorship and authoritarian regimes were previously accused of resorting to such activities, but these tactics are no longer just confined to dictatorship. Now, even democracies are using these tactics to bring back their power, and these political parties, are using this manipulation of information. So, again, bringing it back to information autocracy, which we have seen in America how it is hurting, in Europe, and terrorism also. And also events to achieve certain desired end is becoming stock in trade of many democratic regimes as well. So we have seen America, we have United States of America, we have seen Europe, and now what is happening in India. In some regions, especially midterm elections are scheduled. We have seen already in Bihar, and now later it's going to be in West Bengal 2021. The atmosphere today is highly polarized. COVID-19 pandemic, like in United States, sorry, Europe, again, there is a second wave, which there's a danger of the second wave, have reduced the intensity of protests. The ghost of Citizenship Amendment Act, NRC, Jammu and Kashmir. Aggravating this situation are Pakistan's efforts to push in terrorists in even large numbers. We have a hostile China, which is our neighbor. On the other hand, evident from the announcement made on November 15 that RCEP, India will not be included. That's Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So we are seeing elections, COVID-19, CAA, NRC, Jammu and Kashmir, Pakistan, and India not being part of the RCEP. We are going to discuss a little bit on RCEP today. Pakistan, the latest provocation being holding of assembly elections in Gilgit-Baltistan. Gilgit-Baltistan till now was Pakistan considered their province, but never held elections because it was a disputed area. India considers that as we consider them as ours. India is again being steadily marginalized in Afghanistan, where the control of Taliban is increasing, with all other players in Afghan imbroglio acquiescing in this situation. So in Afghanistan, we are losing out some ground, though we have a lot of interest there, but in the discussions, somewhere India is being marginalized. China's goal. China, no disruptive changes are likely here in the near future. If anything, Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to emerge stronger after the 20th Party Congress. So no much changes. Xi Jinping is going to be more stronger, giving a further impetus to transformation of China into a superpower. They are expecting to be a superpower by 2035. While new foreign policy initiatives may be few, major reform initiatives will be confined to the economy, energy, and new innovation system. NK Narayan. So remember, so did we see in this editorial? What are the global issues? We saw America. First, we spoke about informational autocracy, situation in United States of America, in Europe, where we spoke about UK and France, and the other countries. We also spoke about India, and in India, we spoke about the various issues which are going on, and also the issues like we have in India is on Pakistan and China and CAA and various elections and the COVID-19 pandemic. And this all was written by M.K. Narayanan, who was a former National Security Advisor and Governor of West Bengal. The third editorial is India's mask of liberalism is off. So, trade protectionism seems to be the official policy of the government. After 1991, liberalization, privatization, globalization, we were thought of moving towards liberalization, but somewhere we are actually not. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar recently disapproved of trade and globalization. Now, this is a matter of debate again. He said, in the name of openness, we have allowed subsidized products and unfair production advantages from abroad to prevail, justified by the mantra of an open, globalized economy. It was quite extraordinary that an economy as attractive as India allowed the framework to be set by others. So, what S. Jaishankar is saying, in the name of openness, we have allowed other countries to benefit and grow and trade in India, where we had so much of advantage of population, resources, etc. We did not take the advantage, other countries took. That is what S. Jaishankar is saying, and somewhere he is talking about protectionism. Yes, in the time of COVID, there are many countries going towards protectionism. India is one of them. Okay, but S. Jaishankar and the party which he represents and the government in the government which is there, they themselves was currently means they were opposing of what Nehru did before 1991, but now they are going towards what Nehru had brought in. Taking a dig at free trade agreements, the minister said the effect of past trade agreements has been to deindustrialize some sectors. So he attacked the FTAs. So just see what are the flaws in these arguments. First, so remember these flaws very important in why did they, so he spoke in context of we not joining the RCEP. First, so by refusing to sign RCEP, a sign of weakness, not boldness. India is now truly at the margins of regional and global economy. You must understand, all the countries which were very promising, developing, could come together and do a lot of business have come together. But India did not take part in that. With trade multilateralism at the WTO remaining sluggish, FTAs are the gateways for international trade. WTO is not now working properly. We need to get inside these FTAs. By not being part of major FTAs, India cannot be part of the major global chains. You must have seen how Vietnam, Bangladesh, and even Indonesia is rising because of the trade and investments there. India can't take this risk. Second, India has embraced the economic openness. Has India embraced the economic openness that Mr. Jaishankar laments about? Was India so economically open after 1991? Well, India is surely much more open economy than it was 3 decades ago, but India continues to remain relatively closed. Let's see the facts. According to WTO, India's applied most favored nation import tariffs are 13.8%, which is the highest. So India puts a lot of tariffs. So does it mean we were open earlier? If Jaishankar had said that we lost because of the openness. Were we exactly open? This is the number you should remember, 13.8. UNC UNCTAD, that is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, on the import restrictions, said that India figures at a very restrictive category. From 1995 to 2019, India has initiated anti-dumping measures 972 times, highest in the world. So are we an open economy? So remember, 13.8%, we are very restrictive, and 972 times anti-dumping. Third, in blaming FTAs for the woes of Indian manufacturing, External Affairs Minister is contradicting his own government economic survey. Economic survey had said FTAs are good. Fourth, External Affairs Minister, following the finest tradition of Narendra Modi government, criticized the past governments for compromising interest. However, he did not share why his government failed in convincing 15 other RCEP nations about framework that would be advantageous to India. So this is a political point. They're saying that Narendra Modi government has been criticizing the past governments for whatever has been done. So External Affairs Minister also criticized that the previous prime ministers or the governments were not able to convince the other the outside countries for our benefit, for India's benefit. So the criticism is, why wasn't he able to convince the India's benefit in the RCEP? Finally, in criticizing openness in the economy and globalization, the External Affairs Minister wholly ignored the fact that India is actually a major beneficiary of the globalization. According to economist and Professor Arvind Panagria, was also the Niti Aayog member, poverty in rural and urban India stood at close to 40% in 2004-2005, became half by 2011-12. This was due to an average economic growth at 8%, with international trade being a major engine of progress. So we need to engage with the foreign countries. So is economic liberalism turning to economic illiberalism? When Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister in 2014, it was widely perceived that while his government might be socially conservative, it would be economically liberal. But what the government is doing is completely different. Tariffs have increased. FTAs are considered to be bad, and vocal for local, which strikes at the heart of the international trade and globalization, is the new mantra. The Prime Minister's desire to make India a global destination for foreign investment is a pipe dream. So one side, Prime Minister is saying we need to be an investment hub, a global destination for investment, etc. But on the other side, he is not able to um, open the economy, make the economy liberal. Will it be possible? Will the foreign investors come to India in such a case? It is naive to expect foreign investors to be gung ho about investing in India if protectionism is government's official policy. The mask of economic liberalism is finally off. So use those 4 points in the economic section. Finally, about the bailout which the RBI has given to, or the RBIs have given to the Lakshmi Vilas Bank, and almost simultaneously announce a draft scheme of amalgamation that entails Indian unit of Singapore government controlled DBS Bank taking over capital starved private lender marks a welcome intervention. So there is a 1 month moratorium on Lakshmi Vilas Bank, and later it will be amalgamated with the DBS Bank of Singapore. The well choreographed move will protect the interest of the depositors and employers. So this is a well choreographed move because it will help the interest of the depositors and the employees. And RBI does not want the banks to just close down and people to face losses. The Lakshmi Vilas Bank had been become a candidate for the regulatory intervention was evident after its continuous losses, steady erosion of net worth, and inability to raise capital to bolster its balance sheet. Despite being placed under the RBI's prompt corrective action framework in September, the lender's finances deteriorated to the point where its gross ratio of NPAs shot up to 25.4% in March 2020. So this is not just suddenly they have done it. NPAs, the LVB, that is the Lakshmi Vilas Bank, was already in the RBI's radar, but still NPAs increased to 25.4%. Tier 1 capital ratio turned negative 0.88%, and the capital ratio subsequently worsened to minus 4.85%. Overall banking sector health, however, remains a concern. Pandemic has inflicted on global economy and warned of deeper legacy scars. More stress on corporate balance sheets and governments burdened with large debt. So, a lot of issues here. In its financial stability report in July, the stress has increased. NPA ratio of commercial banks could worsen to 14.7% NPAs from 8.5% a year earlier. If the pandemic's adverse impact caused the GDP to contract by 8.9% in the current fiscal year. So remember, NPS could go up to 14.5. It was 8.5%. In October, the bank forecast India's GDP would shrink by 9.5% earlier this month, cautioned that lurking around the corner was the major risk of stress intensifying among households and firms that could spill over to the financial sector. So just remember, the NPAs are increasing. There will be more banks which might be in danger, more NPAs, and the GDP is also increasing, which will hurt the household and firms. What can be done? In the earlier editorials we had seen, increase the demand. RBI has its task cut out in ensuring it keeps the crucial engine of credit ticking over the economy strives to revive. So that's all for today's editorial discussion. Remember, the art and science of asking question is the source of all knowledge. Thank you.